Hello and welcome to the first episode of Explore. Presented by MOPA Foundation. Vignesh and I are happy to bring the first episode of this series to you, where we are going to attempt to take you through a journey of an artist, to try and listen to them, explore their musicality, their aesthetics, and to understand what made them the artists that they were.
So when we look at musicians, we generally think of specific points about them. For example, when you talk about G.N. Subramania sir, you'll be talking about his Brigas, or Althur brothers, you'll be talking about Pallavis. And if you talk about Srimati Brinda and Srimati Mukta, you'll be talking about their Padams and Javalis. But we would like to delve into a little more about their musicality, a little more about how they looked at music, how they looked at aesthetics, how they looked at so many minute details about their own music. So here we are trying to take you through our observations and explorations after listening to a lot of Musiri Subramania.
He was born before the 1900s, just a year before, in 1899, and compared to most of his contemporaries, his idea of momentum was very different. The momentum was more in the gait of the syllables, the beauty with which he explored the space between the words, the beauty in which he sang neraval in probably just one or two notes. Any neraval that we would listen to would probably start on the note where the first word was of that particular line, and he would just linger there. So his idea of what momentum was, what feel was, what aesthetics was extremely different compared to what was the norm probably in the early 1900s.
So when you also look at Musiri Subramania's music, the one thing that you will notice is his importance to Shruti, and the way he modulates the swaras when he sings, the way he modulates his voice to it. You can say that his music is extremely open-throated. Even in the higher octaves, his music is not just loud, you can say it's open-throated, fully rounded and full-bodied.
I think by modulation, it's also a slight drop in the volume at times to just kind of highlight the fact that he's landed there and is going to spend some time there, which offers a very unique listening experience. There are multiple examples of that we'll just play after this, but then you can see this more so when he lands at a syllable where he's going to pause until the end of that avartanam, and that pause, if it is invariably on the panchama or the shadja, then this aspect of his voice modulation is more pronounced. One other quality in his music that I also feel often we don't tend to look at if it is a male musician. Just like how we don't think of female musicians as being macho. Similarly, when you think of a male musician, you don't think of the music being sensitive, or you don't think of importance being given to, say, pronunciation, which is also generally looked at as a more ladylike quality, where there is discipline in that, but then there is more flamboyance in male music. He was also actually an example to that, where you will find him enunciating the words very beautifully and without a sense of artificial expression. It never sounded put on, or it was never forceful, but it was very natural in the way he said the words. Even if it was Telugu, say like Kaddanu Variki, or even if you take Sanskrit compositions like Neerajakshi Kamakshi that he rendered, his pronunciation was very subtle but very to the point, very musical, very aesthetic, but also blended so beautifully with his voice. So it was a combination of all of these things coming together. For a person like Musiri Subramania Iyer, his concert music was not something that was just on stage. It was a manifestation of his high scholarship, his intellect that comes across through various different things that he does on stage, of course. The amount of space he also gives the people who are sharing the music with him on stage, and the fact that he was also a thinking musician is so beautifully articulated by this one lecture demonstration we have of his. Which was in Delhi, which is available in 6 parts. We'll be happy to share the link here below the video, but it offers such a beautiful insight into the mind of the musician, because often when we are just listening to a recording, most of what we think the process of the musician was is something that is inferred by us based on our own experiences. But then the moment we get to listen to a musician speak about their process themselves, speak about small certain ideas that are part and parcel of their music, then that offers an entirely different window into why they sang the way they sang. So apart from the fact that he chose certain kind of compositions, sang music at a certain pace, molded his voice beautifully to fit the musical values that he had, it was also very clear that he was a thinking musician. We've heard so many of his students through their lecture demonstrations on the Musiri Bani mention about how many things he would say in class. But to know that that was a thought process, not when he was a teacher, but when he was also a performing musician at the peak of his career, is extremely important for, I think, young artists like us to know that evolving as a musician is a constant process, and Musiri Subramania Iyer was somebody who kind of embodied that. In fact, in this lecture demonstration, there are multiple examples that are extremely minute, nuanced, but are very important in understanding what his music was.
It's also very thought-provoking, right? For example, in one of the examples that he states, he says the Gandhara in Arabhi Raga is a Hrisvaswara, is not supposed to be extended.
Arabi in the Jentaswara பிரயோகங்கள்னால தான் அந்த ராகத்துக்கு இருக்கு. இந்த காவை நீட்டப்படாது. நேற்றுக்கே மகாரி சரி மகாரி சொல்றது அவ்வளவு பொறுத்துமே. காந்தாரம் எப்போதுமே ஆரம்பிச்சு ஹ்ரஸ்வஸ்வரம், அல்பஸ்வரம். பப்ப மகரி சரி மகரி ரிபா மகரி தர பாபம் அபதரசனிர ததரதி மகரி தனிர மகரி சரி மகரி பமகரி தாப மகரி மபதனி தாப. இதுக்கு தத்தா தேவகாந்தாருக்கு தனி.
The way we look at music today is split into two, where it's either Lakshana or Lakshya, where it's either very intellectual or grammar that's placed on one side and feel and spontaneity placed on the other, where where they say kelvi jnanam or something that you just pick up but you don't know the grammar behind it. Right. But it's very important for us to understand that both don't exist one without the other.
You cannot call music intellectual without emotion in it. Emotion is also something that is connected with intellect over here, and that beautifully comes out in his music.
So when you hear a musician like Musiri speak about this, then you know that there is a certain amount of thought that has gone behind why he sings it a certain way. So which means that his music even at that moment has spontaneity, has life, has that beauty at the moment of creation.
Right.
The fact that that is beautiful at that moment is because of all this thought, whether intellectual, musicological, how much he is read, how much he is researched. All of this is what supports that moment of beauty. So
Right,
I think
of
that's
course.
very important for us to understand as well.
Right. That also leads to a certain discipline while you're singing.
Definitely.
So all this thought process of grammar, of what to sing, what not to sing, keeping that in the back of your head, and being aware of that also leads to a certain discipline wherein you're not erratically singing something, but it's very thought out.
ஆகிரி ராகத்துக்கு இந்த பிரதிமத்தியமும் ஒன்று நீங்களாக சகல சுரங்களும் வரும்.
But his music naturally flows into it. The feel naturally flows. It's how aware he is while he's singing and how present in what he's singing he is.
வேக இதுக்கு மத்தியமும் கொஞ்சம் தீவிரமா இருக்கும். மாகரி தனிதவ அதகரி கமா பரமகரி நீத நிகாரம் கொஞ்சம் அங்க இறக்கம், இங்க கொஞ்சம் தூக்கம், ரெண்டையும் ஆவரேஜ் பண்ணிவிட்டா சரியா இருக்கும்.
Well, he says any raga that you pick which has a padapasa or a pasa phrasing, there will be a sanisa phrasing also. So these are small points that he notes and that he keeps, that he also brings about in his music.
Yeah, I mean, and these are good pointers for us to have, because then if suppose we are presented with a scale, then you know that the moment the scale has a pasa or a padapasa, then the sanisa can automatically be included because of the rule that we are able to kind of understand from all of these other Prachina ragas like Begada or Ananda Bhairavi or all of these ragas.
Right.
அநேகமா பத்தாங்குத்து பிரயோகம் இருக்கிறதுக்கெல்லாம் தனிசா உண்டு. பதபசா ஆனந்த பேருக்கும் தனிசா உண்டு. பேகடைக்கு கம பத பதீத பசனித தீத ஜரி மாகரி தனித மபத மாகரி நீத ஹரி சகாரி மாக பாமதாப தபதி சகரி மாகரி தனித பரி தனித பவதா ரபம கரி மாக பாமகரி தனித.
But there is another point that he mentions in the Legdom, saying with respect to word split, that is that he wouldn't compromise the musicality of the line just to split the word completely or correctly to retain the meaning.
He actually sings and shows the difference of how the beauty or the flow of the music of that line is affected the moment you try to break at a different point.
Right.
So which means that also the point where you break, not just for breath but also for the beauty, to make sure that the music is still flowing, is as important. We'll just listen to that now.
சில பேர் அக்ஷரத்தை பின்னம் பண்ணப்படாதுங்கிறதுக்காக அந்த பிராசத்தையே மாற்றி விடுறான். இந்த தன்யாசிக்க சங்கீத மதங்கனாகன்னு ஆரம்பிச்சிடுறாங்க. அத அந்த வார்த்தைகள் பின்னமும் படுத்தப்படாது, அந்த தாத்து மாற்றமும் சரியா இருக்கும். இந்த பிராசம் விடப்படாது. அப்படி ரெண்டு சேர்ந்து பாடினா தான் அழகே தவிர அதுக்காக ஒரு தேட்டர் மாதிரி சொல்லிவிடக்கூடாது. நெஞ்சு திறந்த எந்து பேட்டலவலே அது அச்சரம் லோகம் வரப்படாதுங்கிறதுக்காக இந்த மாதிரி சொல்லிட்டா அது அந்த மியூசிக்கல் மீட்டருக்கு ரொம்ப அஃபெண்ட் பண்றது. அப்படி இருக்கக்கூடாது.
I mean, so we just looked at some of the basic qualities of his music without trying to put them under subheadings. Now let's look at them in a little more detail. Let's say we look at his voice, for example. He was somebody who of course sang very boldly, sang with an open throat like he said, but is also somebody who sang at an unnatural pitch of about 4.5. Something that's considered unnatural in today's understanding of what the male voice is within the Carnatic spectrum, because now the given range is anywhere between C and D, say 1 to 2. But in those days, when you didn't have microphones and your voice had to reach a large audience, then you had to sing at a higher pitch just to be able to get that loudness and that throw. But a very interesting case of what happens in those kind of situations is that the moment you kind of increase the pitch, the amount of gamaka or the amount of movement between the notes is automatically reduced. Because of the amount of tension on the voice, there is not enough breadth of movement, because of which you are able to produce the necessary kampita gamaka as we understand it today, which gives Carnatic music its kind of unique aesthetic and flavor. So for somebody like him to sing at 4.5, but to be able to still sing open throated and with that volume, but to be able to produce that kind of kampita gamaka. In fact, if we take his music to any of his other contemporaries of that generation who sang in that pitch, the difference is so stark that you will find all of them singing notes which are much flatter, which was probably how the music sounded in those days. Yes. And automatically, even with music, the moment you slow it down, the amount of space you have between two notes is more. So which means that then the movement that you see between the two notes is more pronounced. And automatically, the moment it's more pronounced, it's more magnified, it's more visible. So which means that then the precision of how much the movement between each note becomes that much more important. And he is somebody who had those gamaka alavis perfect. It was probably relevant then, and for now where we use way more kampita gamaka, what his music still sounds relevant even today. So which means that it was a wonderful bridge between what the music was that he learned or he heard to what the music is today.
Every sangati will have a certain detail to it, whether it be a short sangati, whether it be a long sangati, whether it be a slow sangati, whether it be a fast sangati. There is an amount of detail that is much more pronounced, because maybe also because of the pace of his music. We also see that he has an amazing awareness about his voice. When he sings lower octaves, his voice is much fuller, and when he sings higher octaves, it is full. It's not that it's not,
but it's not like he's shouting.
It's not like he's shouting. Like vaya thorandu paduvan solluval. Yeah, that's the beautiful part. I mean, it's not shouting, it's not loud. It is modulated, but it is open throated also. So he was extremely aware of his voice, how to modulate his voice.
Lovely balance between the entire range of the octaves he covered.
Like even sangatis in the higher octaves, while singing gamakas in the higher octaves, how he modulated his voice to incorporate the kampita gamaka also in the higher octaves was very, very beautiful. It was not just a plain brute force singing of the gamaka, but there was a modulation within the gamaka itself, and that was very beautiful.
Which is why I believe that there is no one good idea of what a voice should be in Carnatic music, because invariably you will find that what we think of as good voices are people who are able to successfully marry the idea of what the sound of their voice was and the idea of their music. And when both of these come together, then you automatically know that there is a kind of synergy that happens between the two, because of which the music is what it is. You can't separate the voice, you can't separate the idea, but both together are the music. So it doesn't matter what the quality of the voice is, and I don't think this is true of just Carnatic music, any genre of music. The moment you understand your voice, you understand your music, and you find where both come together, that I think is where the place of magic happens, and this is true of every great artist that I think we listen to.
Another aspect of his music that we would like to look at is his patantara. The Musiri Bani, if you want to call it that, is also pretty extensive. There are many students of the Musiri Bani. For a Bani to exist, there needs to exist a very, very strong patantara. And we know so many kirtanas that Musiri Subramania has sung which have such a strong patantara. For example, when you look at his Namurala Kimpa, or when you look at his Entavedu Kontragava, or his Tiruvadi Charanam, or his Kaddanuvariki, there are so many Kirtanams. And many musicians of that generation, for example, Shemaguri Srinivas Iyer, M.S. Subbulakshmi, T.N. Krishnan sir, V.V. Subramaniam sir, all of them have gone and learned, K.V. Narayan
so
Swami,
many of them
have gone and learned from Musiri Subramania Iyer, and that speaks a lot about the Pathantara and the way, the discipline with which the Kirtanas were thought about, the discipline with which the Sangatis were taught about, the thought and that has gone into all of this.
Absolutely. And I also think that often we think of Pathantara as something that is set in stone or something that is static. But his was not so, because if you look at the way he set Neerajakshi Kamakshi out of the Sangeeta Sampradaya Pradarshini, or in fact we should probably listen to a clip of him singing Pahimam Ratnachalanayaka in Mukhari, where the moment you listen to his singing and then you look at the notation that is available on the SSP, Sangeeta Sampradaya Pradarshini, you will find that it is identical to the T. So which means that what was probably in text was also then given life, set to music by him with his own interpretation of the gamakas based on what was available, taught to students, which is probably now being sung by so many people. And this is what I think is also a very important aspect of a style becoming a bani. So Musiri is somebody who gave so much importance to that. You will find that in the way his students still talk about how they learnt compositions from him and how strict he would be in how they retain those compositions.
Right. You can see that beautifully in the home recordings that we have, where T.K. Govindarao sir has sung with him, and to see that they have sung throughout together without a sangati going amiss even at one point. It's just beautiful and just speaks to how he has taught his students and how they have retained the patantara so well.
Yeah, and it wasn't just one or two compositions.
Yeah.
There are about 40 or 50, and the handful of recordings we have of Musiri from his All India Radio recordings and Music Academy recordings. You will know that there's another voice singing along only when he pauses or when there's a drop in the volume.
Right.
Apart from that, there is no other point where you will find even the slightest of difference where you will know that there's another voice singing along. So that's how structured and methodical I think their versions were.
Also, if you look at his songs, even now when people who have not learned from him sing it, or people who he's from his own school, his own Bani sing it, it retains a flavor of Musiri in it, right?
Definitely.
When you listen to an Enthavedu Kunturagava, he brought out his style and
like they say, his stamp.
His stamp, yes. Or you listen to a Tiruvadi Charanam, or you listen to any Samugana Nilva, any of his hits, if you call it, it'll contain that one flavor of Musiri that you
No,
say.
actually, now that you mention it, I feel like also an important aspect of a good Bani that has a good Patantara should be that if somebody who doesn't belong to that Patantara aims to learn that song from, say, a recording or a Patantara of this Bani, it should still be accessible where there is enough space within that Patantara for them to mold it and make it theirs, which I think Musiri's Patantara has. And so many people sing most of his compositions now, learned from his, but have made it their own, which again the credit goes to the way he's, I think, structured and I think sang those compositions.
Given some space to people to maneuver within that. Right?
Yeah.
That's the beautiful part about his Patantara.
Yeah, so when you mentioned Kokila Varali, for example, that's a wonderful example because at that time I don't think anybody else sang a ragam like Kokila Varali. So that's a beautiful kind of link for us to move into his approach towards ragams.
His approach to singing alapanas, for example, when you listen to it, has small phrases, shorter phrases with gamakas. And he's done this not only for the rarer ragas, but he's also done it for the bigger ragas, if you want to say, like Todi, Bhairavi, Kamboji, Shankarabharanam. All these ragas, he has sung shorter phrases with a lot of gamaka expressions, which is akin to the veena playing.
Yeah, I think that stems from the fact of how we have come to understand raga music today.
Right.
Especially, I think from the period of Shemangudi and GNB, where it is no secret that both of them were so highly influenced by Nagaswaram music. Nagaswaram is an instrument that automatically has a lot of karvais, and where the phrases are kind of embedded within those karvais. So when that is the style of raga music that is predominantly available to us today, somebody who sings ragas like Musiri or like say Brindama or like say to a certain extent even somebody like Ramnath Krishnan, where there are shorter phrases and where the development is more phrase based rather than note based, where say it's revolving around a note, you will find that they never latch on to one note and kind of develop around it. The development is more
phrase based,
kind of organic in a way. You kind of go from one to the other without it being a link based through swaras.
Right.
The link is based more through the sound of the phrase.
Rightly, like you said, when you look at his alapanas, it's the region in which he develops. For example, when he is singing Todi or Bhairavi or any of these ragas, he develops a region. It's not like he's speaking 3 or 4 swaras and developing. Now, when he's singing around Pa, there are short phrases around Panchama that goes to Devata and come. The sound is maintained very beautifully. The sound of that region, the sound of the raga in the Panchama Devata Nishada region before going to Sajja. How there is a transition from that region to the Sajja region.
And also when he's developing it around Pa, say if he's singing Todi around Pa, then you know that invariably the composition that follows, the space that he's going to maybe pick for neraval and swaram is also something that's going to be predominantly kind of around the Panchama region. So you can kind of be sure that then the composition is going to be Ambanadu followed by neraval swaram at Varahi Vaishnavi, which is then only around Pa. And then you will listen to him kind of for a lack of a better colloquial term, kind of own the Pa and just lose himself in that, and you will find the first 2 or 3 rounds of neraval will possibly have only Pa, where he then goes with the flow of the lyrics, probably adds a Da somewhere, adds a Ma to finish, so that he can get back to Pa. So his raga approach was also very closely linked to the feel and emotion of what it was that was going to follow. And also he was, like we spoke about him really paying attention to grammar and everything. He was
somebody who was, from what we hear from his legdems and from the legdems of his students, he was somebody who was extremely aware of the krama of the raga, who actually paid a lot of attention to it, who gave it a bit of importance also. But that never stopped him from singing the raga with a flow, with a free flowing feel to it.
Yeah, it wasn't like he was constantly thinking whether what he's singing is grammatically right.
Right, there was no whether it was padapasa or whether it was a padapasa nisariga. No, there was no thought about what, he was not thinking swarams. The rule was embedded in the flow, in the feel of the raga for him. It was a part of the raga for him.
One of the other things that is also very obvious in his choice of ragams is that they were predominantly more Prachina ragams. You would find him sing ragas like Husaini, ragas like Ahiri, and especially in that legdem you will find him give us so many minute details about how the Rishabha of Punnagavarali should be handled, how the Gandhara of Asaveri should be handled.
How the Madhyama of Ahiri can be handled.
So many of those little things, which means that he was so aware of the history of what his art form was, the present practice, and also what he thought was the way forward. In fact, in so many examples, we will find that when he sings a composition, there will be phrases that are outside what he believes should be, but he will still retain that phrase in the way he sings the composition, because that's part of the tradition that he's learned from. But he will always tell his students, and in that lecture kind of tell people that if he was to sing swaram, he would probably not sing that. But that doesn't mean that he will remove that sangati from a composition, which is also extremely important.
So let's now move on to talking about his tanam singing. There are very few recordings of Musiri Subramania singing tanam. For example, there's a recording of an Anand Bhairavi Ragam Tanam Pallavi, which he sang at the Music Academy in 1959. There is a Bhairavi Ragam Tanam Pallavi, which he sung in 1958. There is also another recording of him singing Natakurunji Tanam in the Navaratri Mandapam.
With the accompaniment of the Mridangam, as is the custom there.
Yeah, so yes, there are a few recordings, but when you listen to these recordings of Tanam, you will also notice...
of course, apart from this, there's also the Bhairavi and the Todis of...
So, when you listen to these recordings, like in the raga, the Tanam is also developed very phrase-based. The Tanam syllables are used very beautifully along with the phrasing of the raga, and there is a development which is pattern-based, phrase-based, and the syllable of the Tanam is maintained, with the Madhyama Kala being maintained in that tempo very beautifully. So, I mean, it's...
no, and another fascinating aspect is that there is never any break until he finishes an entire portion of the Tanam, nor does he use intervals between patterns to sing any phrases of ragam that don't have an intrinsic rhythm, which I think is one of the most important aspects of the Tanam, because from beginning to end, I believe that there has to be an underlying rhythm from the time you start singing a Tanam till the time you choose to end it. Because that is the whole characteristic of the Tanam. The moment you remove the underlying rhythm, it is just another raga.
It was called Madhyama Kalam.
Next, we will look at neraval singing, which was his forte. There are ample recordings and examples of his approach towards neraval singing. We've had many of his students conduct workshops on Musiri's Bani of neraval singing. We know that he was very strict about the placement of syllables. You couldn't move them, or you couldn't extend the number of avartanams that say a specific line had. For example, if you were singing Neraval at Vasavadi Sakaladevan, Sri Subramania Namaste, and if it was 4 avartanams, you couldn't take a gap at a syllable kind of in between and extend the overall count of those 4 lines to 5 and then get back to Vasavadi. So there were many guiding principles like this that he followed. He also believed that when you were singing Kirkala Neraval, just the finishing phrase of that to lead back to the refrain line cannot be Madhyama Kala. He believed that the moment you added that Madhyama Kalam at the end, maybe a 5 or a Sanidapama or something, that the next round you sang automatically had to move into the male Kala. So such was his thought of how neraval should be, so that that flow was maintained as well. So when we are looking at that, we have to look at examples of his neraval for ragas like Janaranjani, Mukhari.
Kamani balamula Kanulara Kamani Palamula Rodegi Kanulara Sevindi Kamani Palamula Rodegi Kanulara Sevindi Kamani Palamula Rodegi
There's one aspect that is very noteworthy is that he starts the neraval. Suppose the line starts at Panchamam, the neraval will continue at the Panchamam. For example, in Nada Dinamata and Janaranjani Raga, he'll start the neraval around Pa, and the entire line he'll just be singing Pa for about 2 or 3 rounds of the neraval. So starting 2 or 3 rounds, and he'll experience that Pa, that region, along with the syllables of the line.
Yeah, he almost creates a continuum between the rhythm of the talam that you constantly keep hearing with the mridangam, and with the flow of the lyrics, and with that one single note. So it's almost like you're layering the lyrics and the rhythm on top of one note, which is a very different way of looking at neraval as opposed to how we do it today, where we use the lyrics and the rhythm as a base onto which we layer so many notes.
Right. And it creates like an envelope around which, even though you're singing that one note, you're actually hearing that entire ragam along with that one note. It's a continuation of the sound of that raga. And he does this not only for lines which have more number of syllables, actually, he does it for lines which have lesser number of syllables also. The Janaranjani line has lesser number of syllables than the Todi neraval that he's so famous for singing at Varahi Vaishnavi for Ambanathu Vinnapamu.
Or Chintadir Chutta, for example, where all you hear is the Antaragandaram in his beautiful voice for a period of time before he moves around. And actually another interesting aspect there is, for at least a good 3-4 rounds, you won't hear him sing anything but Sarigama.
Yeah.
Where that Sarigama can be Shankarabharanam, can be Kamboji, can be any number of ragams. but you don't hear any other ragam there because of the impact of Saraswati Manori is already created before.
Right, of course.
He sung a very cute two avartanam neraval for a raga like Shuddha Simantini,
Right.
where before moving into the swaram, he uses the neraval as a natural progression into the idea of singing swaram.
While singing swaram for in one of the recordings that we will play, Endudagi Nadu, when he sings swarams for Alanadu, his neraval will be at that region, and then his swarams will also be at that Panchama region.
Along the Panchama. And actually what he does is, apart from the swarams being entirely along the Panchama region, of course Endudaki Nadu is in Mishra Chapu, so which means that in Kirkalam, one cycle of Mishra Chapu you can sing 7 notes. And singing one avartanam swarams, singing a lot of one avartanam swarams is generally linked to maybe a composition like Bro Barama or something like Ma Kelara, where you sing like a lot of Madhyama Kalam, but he's actually done that to so many different compositions in the Kirkalam using only 7 notes that are available to him for one avartanam. This is actually one such example.
very oral approach to music also, right? It's developing around 3 or 4 swaras. You can see that he is not looking at just combinations or trying to retrofit 3 swaras and the permutation combination of it. It's a very sound oriented, very, very feel oriented approach to swaram singing. Even male kala swarams, he beautifully sings Oravartana swarams. And the same pattern is maintained when he's singing male kala swarams also. He will sing Oravartana swarams at the region where the neraval line is there, and you won't see a discontinuum in Kid kala swaram to male kala swaram. It will flow into each other. Very, very beautifully it will flow into each other.
Right. I mean, we all hear people say that, the Taniyavartanam should be an extension of the composition. But how many times do we actually approach the idea of a neraval or a swaram as a continuation of that line?
Right.
It is, I think, an important question that we must ask, because many of the times the moment you switch into a neraval or a swaram mode, the only thing that we tend to see is actually the ragam and the possibilities of the ragam. Without what are the possibilities of that ragam, of that particular line, to the line I am kind of adjoining the swarams to, and the composition to which that line belongs to. So, right. I think that is something that we often miss, and I think that is beautifully seen in a lot of the way he approaches Manodharma.
Also in swaram singing, he's given a lot of importance to Sarvalagu swaram singing, as he's mentioned in his Legdem also. We can try and play that section of the Legdem. And very beautifully he mentioned that it brings out the aesthetic of the raga, the sound and the feel of the raga.
முக்கியமா இந்த தடிகணதம்ங்கிறது ஸ்வரம் பாடுறதுக்கு வேண்டியதே அனாவசியம். ஒருத்தர் ஒரு 50-55 வருஷத்துக்கு முன்னால வித்வான் பெயரை சொல்லுவாங்க. அவர் பாடினார், இந்த கோர்வையெல்லாம் போட்டு பாடினார். புதுக்கோட்டையில மான்பூண்டியா பிள்ளைன்னு ரொம்ப பிரசித்தமான கஞ்சிரா வித்வான், தாள லயத்துல ரொம்ப ரொம்ப பெரிய மகா வித்வானா இருந்தார். அவர் கச்சேரி ஆன உடனே இந்த பாடினாரும் ஒரு சின்ன வயசு, இப்ப ரொம்ப வயசு. என் சுவாமி, நீங்க சௌக்கியமா பாடப்படாதா, இந்த சம்பிரதாயமா இந்த சர்வலகுவா பாடினேன்னாக்க ரொம்ப எங்களுக்கு வாசிக்கிறதுக்கு சிரமம். இந்த கோர்வையா பாடிட்டேன்னா நாங்க ரொம்ப சுலபமா வாசி விடுவோம், இதை நீங்க வச்சுக்க வேண்டாம் அனாவசியம் மான்பூண்டியா பிள்ளை சொன்னார். இந்த சர்வலகுங்கிறது இருக்கு, இது இந்த காமன் சென்ஸ்ங்கிறாப்புல ரொம்ப அன்காமன். இந்த சர்வ சிரமம்னு வச்சிருக்கணும், அத சர்வ லகுன்னு வச்சுட்டான். அது அந்த இன்டர்வெல்லாம் கொஞ்சம் கூட இன்னுக்கு பின்னு போகாதபடிக்கு ரொம்ப அந்த காலப்பிரமாணம் சுத்தமா, வேற கோர்வை அனாவசியமா அது இல்லாதபடிக்கு ரொம்ப சர்வலகு வந்துடுச்சுன்னா சகலமும் வந்ததாக அர்த்தம். அதுக்கு மேல மற்றதெல்லாம் வர்றது ரொம்ப சுலபம், இதுதான் ரொம்ப கஷ்டம்.
So not only the Kirkala swarams that he sings in that region, maintaining the region of the neraval line, even the male kala swarams, when he sings, he maintains that region. There is a flow from the kirtana to the neraval, from the neraval to the Kirkala swaram, from the Kirkala swaram to the male kala swaram also. And you can actually see this very beautifully in the Bhairavi Pallavi, the Yanakavar Sundamadi that he sings. The Pallavi is set in the Tarasthai, it's around the Tarasthai Sajjam. The Kirkala swaram, the neraval will be completely explored there, the Kirkala swarams will be explored there. The male kala swarams also will be sung in that region. And the point is, everything is just establishing that sound of that Tarasthai, and he establishes it, and that's the end of the Pallavi.
That is actually very interesting, because it's not even a line from a composition where the composition has an aesthetic feel. It's just two avartanams of one line that still has a sonic value to it,
right,
that he tends to follow.
Right, and even in the Kirtanam, he has to come back and suppose he is not finished the Kirtanam and the neraval line just continues, he has to come back and finish the Kirtanam.
And it still feels like it's connected.
Yes, exactly. And that's a very, very beautiful aspect.
Right. one thing that is very obvious from listening to Musiri is that he was a musician, he was a human being with a very open mind. He was never afraid to say what he firmly believed in. We know that he's learnt from Veena Dhanammal. We have an interview of Brinda herself mentioning that Musiri Subramania used to come and learn from Veena Dhanammal. We have a recording of him singing the Sahana Padam, singing the Marubari Javali in Senjurity, and it shows that he was a musician who was constantly willing to get better, evolve, improve and learn from all the good that he saw around him. And that I think is very important as a musician, to kind of challenge yourself and push yourself and expand your own boundaries, because that is the only way that I think the art within us evolves. And when you listen to him speak about tradition and history, you know that he has ample respect for it, but he is also very clear about his own position. Right. That he is not somebody who is afraid to say, this is what it was before, but this is what I believe. I don't think we should look at that as disrespecting tradition or history, but as somebody who is firm about what his beliefs are and what he thinks is relevant to him at that stage of time. Because tradition or history or the past is not something that is to be judged based on today's understanding of things.
It's very evident in the way he's singing, right? The ragams and his own beliefs and how he can sing the ragams, the kramas and everything. For example, in Dhanyasi, it's known that he won't sing a panipa phrase, or in Begada he won't sing the nisari garisani phrase. But yeah, if they are there in his patantara, in the way he has learnt them, in the way he has been taught, he still singing that in the composition without disrespecting what he has learnt. But when he's singing his own music, he has the conviction to say that, yeah, I don't believe
when
in this.
When he's singing a ragam or something, we've heard that he would kind of advise his students to not sing Nisariga Risani but Nisaga Risani when they're singing Begada, for example. But in a composition like Gettiganu or other compositions where the phrase is there, he would still retain the phrase. He would not remove it.
Exactly. So that's a beautiful juxtaposition of how he looks at tradition and what he has learnt with respect to what he believes in and what his music is. So that's a very beautiful aspect of him as a human being also.
Yeah, and I mean, from all of this, from the way we know that his approach to music is, we know that he is a constantly evolving musician who is learning and exploring all the time, and is not just static or focused purely on performance oriented music, as we like to call it today. And I think the fact that he had the leisure to be able to constantly re-examine himself also went back to the fact of how much value he placed on his own music. He continued teaching so many people. He took up multiple different roles, like being the principal at the Adayar Music College here, and he taught so many students. He was constantly engaging with music. He would be seen at every lecture demonstration at Music Academy, constantly contributing and kind of even influencing thought processes about how the future of this music should be shaped. And
he did sing a concert. He did sing a couple of concerts at Music Academy 10 years ago.
58, 59. I mean, and apart from that, he was still singing. But the fact that when you're at the peak of your career, to say, I'm going to take a step back, I think is a phenomenal idea to any artist about how they should look at their own art form and value their own principles of what music should be or how they value their music to be.
Right. He was such a big inspiration for all musicians in his generation. He was well respected among all musicians of his generation, and of course across generation he was a big inspiration for so many musicians. That speaks of his personality, it speaks of his musicianship, of his values, of this conviction in his music. It's just phenomenal that an artist is respected so widely and has such amazing values.
Just the fact that he was so convinced about his own values and principles in music was more than enough for us to say that he was a musician far ahead of his time, a musician who still remains relevant today, and I think a musician who continues to inspire.
Right. To be such an open-minded musician, to be a musician that is so aware of his music and his principles and his convictions is something that all of us of our generation would like to emulate and achieve. And with that, we'd like to thank you all for watching
yeah.
this episode, and we're looking forward to doing many such episodes and looking into and delving into and listening and immersing ourselves into the music of many legends and trying to put forth our observations and interpretations.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And this has been a learning experience for us. We had great fun. This is an endless ocean, and we are learning so much from this process. So we're just thankful for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
மகனிகர் குதளமில்லே மகனிகர் குதளமில்லே சததளங்கள் விகஜிதல் சததளங்கள் விகஜிதோஜை வாரிசாதலதில் வாழ்பொல்லே வண்ணமே ஒளி சொன்னமே நடை அனவே இடை பின்னமே பெற வண்ணமே ஒளி சொன்னமே நடை அனவே இடை பின்னமே பெற வந்ததன பரவல்கியே அதிவிருப்ப அதிவிருப்பத்துடனுரைக்கும் வார்த்தையை கேளாசை மில்ஜி